I'm going to call the regular meeting of the Springfield Economic Development Agency of November 22nd to order. With the roll call, please.
Board Member Van Gordon.
Still here.
Board Member Pitts.
Here.
Board Member Moe.
Here.
Board Member Rodley.
Here.
Board Member Stair.
Here.
Chair Woodrow.
Here.
Board Member Pictionary.
I'm here, thank you.
And Board Member Burney. Here.
As we begin our meeting tonight, I would like to ask members of the audience who are joining us by phone or online to please keep yourselves on mute until you are called to provide public testimony. There will be one time designated for public testimony this evening and will be listed as business from the audience. If you are joining us online with a tablet, smartphone, or computer and wish to speak during that time, please use the raise hand feature. When you are called upon, please state your name, ward, or general location and the subject you would like to speak about. To provide public testimony, please use the raised hand feature when the agenda item is called. First item, please.
Chair, the first item is business from the audience. And we'll look at the attendees. And if, again, you can raise your hand, we'll get you in the queue. Chair Woodrow, we have our first speaker. That speaker is Daphne Mantis. Daphne, you should be able to unmute your microphone on your side. Hello, Daphne, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, we can hear you.
Okay. I am Daphne Mantis. I live on West D Street in Springfield on the north bank of the Willamette River. I have 3 questions for the developer. First, I'd like to know the understanding of the developer as to the organizing principles for new development contained in the Glenwood Refinement Plan. Second, I'd like the perspective of the potential developer as to the statement in the land use and built form chapter of the refinement plan, page 23, and it regarding new development along the river, that it should, and I'm quoting, recognize and respect the unique natural, recreational, and aesthetic amenities provided by the Willamette River as it flows through Glenwood. In addition, requirements of the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act call for specific measures to make development environmentally responsible by enhancing and conserving the water quality and wildlife habitat functions of the Willamette River and its riparian corridor. And third, if this developer is hired, I'd like to know who would be the land use experts who have the riparian expertise to meet the standards, the high standards contained in the Glenwood Refinement Plan. I also ask if these questions are not addressed in the public presentation tonight, I'd ask that they are answered in a written submission to SEDA so that it will be part of the public record and available to us in the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Daphne.
Chair Woodrow, just checking, it does not appear we have any other hands raised for this item.
Okay. We have next item then, please.
Next item, Chair, is new business. Item number 1, the Glenwood Riverfront request for qualification submission presentation. And Courtney Creasel is here for the staff report.
Let me make sure I can get this right. Good evening, Chair Woodrow and SEDA board agents. I want to thank everyone for meeting this evening. We're really looking forward to the presentation ahead and the start of many conversations. This past fall, the board issued for the first time a formal request for qualifications from developers. You'll hear us refer to it as an RFQ. The document was linked in your packet this evening as attachment 1. Important to note that the RFQ is about qualifications. It was very much about us asking a development team to talk they are, what their themes and priorities for development are, and what their past experiences as far as alignment to those themes. As part of it, we were also very upfront that we were not asking for any proposals at this time. So there will not be in-depth conversation about shape of development or specifics of what we might expect in form on the Glenwood Riverfront. And that's partly because we asked actually for them to not dive deeply into that as part of the submission. There may be discussion of themes, but we'll do our best to stay on walking through their qualifications and experiences and their submission as part of the RFQ. So as part of that process, one submission was received by the combined development team that you will meet this evening, Edlin and Company in partnership with DeChase Mixis. This is an opportunity for them to present and introduce their firm, their projects, experience, primary approaches to development. It'll allow also for an opportunity for questions and dialogue after. For that window, we've actually asked Nick Popenook with Tiberius Consulting to facilitate the question and answer. Nick has quite a bit of experience with the board assisting us with financial assessments and guidance on past projects, and we thought it would make him ideal for not only facilitating some of the questions that might come from the board, but also some that we as staff have as well, just so we can get as much robust dialogue as possible. We do have 90 minutes. We expect there to be about a 30-minute presentation here from Edlin and Mark Mixis, from Jill Sherman of Edlin and Company and Mark Mixis from DeChase Mixis. We're going to ask board members, if possible, to hold questions until the end. Their presentation does a really good job building on itself as it goes. And we will watch for questions and we'll make plenty of time. The other note is that while the evening is focused on the presentation and this initial introduction, the staff, we will be bringing back to you on December 6th a full summary of outcomes of their submission, the review of their submission, the technical review committee work, as well as some of the reference and financial disclosure information. So this is one piece of all the information provided and opportunities, and we'll be back on the 6th to talk in more depth about some of those other activities. Without further ado, I will step back and invite Jill Sherman and Mark Mixis up to the screen. Really looking forward to meeting and hearing from them. And I will be running this presentation for them. So if you hear them yelling at me to click forward, it's because I've lost my mouse, and I will get that started now. Do you all want it up on screen to begin, or do you want to introduce yourself first?
We'll do a quick introduction, and then you can pull that up. So
perfect.
To be able to see each other's faces a little bit better as we're introducing ourselves. So I'm Mark Mixis here with Jill Sherman. As Courtney said, thank you, Chair Woodrow and SEDA board agents. It's a pleasure to be here in front of you. We're very excited about this project. We've had some great conversations with staff, and just really, we recognize the importance of this project for Springfield and the larger community, and really the importance of this site. So I just want to say we're really excited about this and happy to be here. with that said, why don't you go ahead and start the presentation, Courtney? Make sure we don't have any technical issues, and then we'll jump right in. So.
Can folks see that?
Yeah, perfect. And you can go ahead and jump right to the next slide. So I'll just quickly, yeah, and that's fine. You can jump to that one. I'll talk a little bit about myself and our firm, kind of the relationship we have with Edlin & Co. And then I'll let Jill introduce her firm. And then we're going to walk you through sort of our approach to projects like this, and then walk you through some of our past experience. So I grew up in this community. This is, I consider the Eugene Springfield area my hometown. My business partner, Dean Pape, also grew up here. I went to kids sports post-game at Pietro's Pizza, now Roaring Rapids. So certainly understand the importance of that site, and excited to have more experiences like Roaring Rapids along that river. I think it's underutilized, and certainly a great opportunity for Springfield to really expand itself and have that great riverfront. I am a U of O grad, went to architecture school at U of O, and then started a company with my business partner, Dean Pape, back in 2012 as a regional real estate consulting firm, primarily working on projects around the region. Since then, we've grown to having offices in Eugene, Bend, and Boise. There's two divisions to our company. We have a real estate development company, and we have a construction management firm. And so our construction management firm reaches across Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, and we do real estate development in all of those markets. Dean, my business partner, originally worked with Girding Edlin. That was the predecessor to Edlin & Co. And so our approach and our values were largely modeled after the work that Edlin & Co. had done. So you'll see as we talk about projects and as we formulated this relationship, a lot of the same values with how we work together. We started this partnership with a project, and actually you'll see it in the slide on the upper right there, called Ashen River in Boise. It was a workforce housing project. We partnered with Edlin & Co. on this and really had a great success, and developed from that project what we call our Intermountain Strategy. That was a strategy that really looked at secondary and tertiary markets that had livability, lifestyle focus, were more affordable than large metro markets. And that was something we started actually pre-COVID. As COVID advanced, that strategy actually galvanized even more, and we saw a huge migration into communities like Eugene and Springfield, Boise. We're doing work currently in Spokane, Coeur d'Alene, Bend. So the areas that have this great outdoor lifestyle, have great livability, became a focus of our work. And that's a partnership now that we've done 8 combined projects on. With that, I'm going to turn it to Jill and let her talk a little bit about Edlin & Co.
Thanks, Mark. Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, good. Okay, Jill Sherman with Edlin & Company. We are one of 2 successor companies to what was Girding Edlin. Girding Edlin has been around for about 25 years, headquartered in Portland and focused on mixed use, primarily urban, transit-oriented, highly sustainable development in the big cities up and down the West Coast, as well as Boston and Chicago. In early 2020, Girding Edlin evolved into separate companies, and one of those 2 is Edlin & Company. Mark Edlin is one of my co-founders and partners in Edlin & Company, and he was also obviously a co-founder of Girding Edlin. And then one other partner from Girding Edlin, Roger Craig, is also now one of my partners at Edlin and Company. And then Matt Edlin, Mark Edlin's son, also was with us, was at Girding Edlin and is now at Edlin and Company. I've been with the company for about 19 years, and at Girding Edlin and now at Edlin and Company, I led our public-private partnership practice and our work with nonprofits. So I have a lot of experience working with cities and transit agencies and urban renewal agencies, as well as nonprofit projects that include affordable housing, as well as community facilities, including mental health facilities and drug and alcohol rehab facilities. And we are excited to hope to bring kind of some of those lessons that we've learned over time about how to make a place to this site in Glenwood. Next slide. I think we can go to the next one. To explain a little bit about how we work together, as Mark noted, we've got 8 projects that we are in some part of the process with, so either completed, in pre-development, or under construction. And so we have figured out how to work together and kind of how to divide tasks. This is a very high level allocation of tasks. We end up with a very detailed list before we start a project that really covers everything and who's the lead, so that there's a lot of clarity. But just to give you a sense, we would expect that together we would lead team selection, all of the other consultants and partners that we need to bring to make a project like this a reality. We would work together on the master planning, and we would work together on the underwriting. And then when we come to it and we're actually working on the design for a building or a vertical development, we would work on that design process together as well. DeChase would take the lead on community engagement with the neighboring property owners and the entitlements, really leveraging their local relationships and long history with the community. And we would take the lead on the infrastructure funding, so figuring out the public-private partnership and ways to finance things like road, new stormwater systems, et cetera, that are needed, open space. We also expect that we would take the lead on raising the debt and equity needed for the project, both to build the infrastructure as well as the buildings, and also bring to both the infrastructure and the buildings our experience with integrating non-traditional funding sources into capital stacks, so that we can do some really interesting things with our projects and achieve some interesting kind of community and public policy goals, in addition to the basic real estate goals of building a building. Next slide. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about our approach to some of what we see are these kind of key elements that will be important to how we work with the city on this project. In terms of assembling the team, so far the only people we've brought to the table are the proposed joint venture development partners, DeChase and Edlin and Company. There's obviously a whole host of other firms and partners and collaborators that we need to bring to the table. That would include architects and master planners and environmental consultants, as well as, when we get there, contractors and subcontractors. We haven't made any decisions yet about who would fill any of those roles. I can tell you that in the past, we've had success with combining a more regional firm, architecture firm and master planning firm that has experience in a number of different similar types of large scale redevelopments with a local firm to kind of get the best of both worlds. There aren't that many projects like this where you're working on a redevelopment and master plan for such a large area. So there aren't that many architects that have a number of them under their belt, and we'd like to work with someone else, ensure there's someone at the table that has that experience and expertise. We also know how important it will be that we're creative about the way that we get both the infrastructure as well as the building finance, so that we can achieve the myriad of different types of goals for this project. And I'll give you a couple of examples in just a minute. And then I'll also give you a couple of examples on some of our projects and what we've been able to achieve in terms of social and environmental impact. I will say that Edlin & Company and Girding Edlin was founded with an approach to development that always prioritized minimizing the negative environmental impacts of the built environment. We've been a real leader and we continue to push that envelope, and I'll talk about a couple pretty groundbreaking projects. And on the social impact side, we are really interested in how we do our business, treat the folks that we work with, and as well as trying to benefit communities in which we work, working with populations that aren't necessarily typically the beneficiaries of new development. Next slide. So one project that I'll talk a little bit more about later in the presentation, but I just wanted to give an example of kind of some creativity around infrastructure funding is the Brewery Blocks, which is a multi-block mixed-use redevelopment in Portland. And one of the real keys to unlocking this development was a district parking strategy. So rather than build the parking in separately for each building, there's one large garage. It actually goes under 3.5 City of Portland blocks on 3 floors below grade and has about 1,300 spaces. And it provides all the parking needed to serve the development, as well as provides public parking that's available to the public at large. By doing it this way, we were able to develop a much more efficient garage. That larger floor plate made it more efficient, which meant it was less expensive on a per stall basis. It also means that we're able to share stalls, which means that we're able to use the same stall when a resident, for example, who parks in the evenings but may not be there during the day, then that stall is available for short-term parking or perhaps office parking during the day. And that garage was actually funded with a loan from the City of Portland's Urban Renewal Agency, who really stepped in and helped fund that component of the project when it was difficult to get a traditional lender to step in, because we were essentially building all of the parking before we had all the buildings built. And it was the buildings which really created the demand for all that parking. So the parking came first, and then the demand increased as the buildings were delivered over time. Next slide. This one is an example of creative financing and complex financing on a building, so vertical development. This is a project called the Nick Fish, which we recently completed in East Portland with a nonprofit, Human Solutions. The land is actually owned by the city's Urban Renewal Agency, and it's on a ground lease. There's actually 4 different condominium ownerships, because in order to use the different financial tools that we wanted to use, we had to separate them, because we have low-income housing tax credits that are supporting affordable housing at or below 60% of area median income. And then we have new market tax credits that are supporting middle-income housing at 80 to 120% of area median income, as well as an office and social service center for the nonprofit Human Solutions. So I don't necessarily advise that every project be this complex. My point is just that we are very used to using a lot of different types of financing tools in order to achieve the outcomes that are most beneficial to the project and to the community. Next slide. The PAE Living Building is a project we just finished that where my office is. You're all invited to tour when you are in Portland. It is the largest commercial living building that's been built to date. For folks who are not familiar with the Living Building Challenge, it is the most aggressive sustainability program and certification that exists. This building will be completely net zero energy. It will be net zero water. We will not, once it's fully up and operational, we will not use city water or city sewer. It's the first developer-led building, which means it was financed with a fairly traditional capital stack of debt and equity. We did take advantage of the fact that the property is located in an opportunity zone. And many of the cash investors that came into the project came in through the Opportunity Zone Fund and will take advantage of those tax benefits. Next slide, please. Latina Kerr is an affordable housing project that's under construction right now in Gresham, Oregon. The project is done in partnership with Latina Kerr. They serve individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. The housing will serve sort of two different populations. One is it will serve individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities who typically cannot find a unit that is both accessible to them and also affordable to them. So we made significant upgrades in about 30 of these units that will be affordable to extremely low folks with IDD. And those upgrades are all to make it possible to live in that unit regardless of what your disability is. Most of the rest of the units are at 60% of area median income, with a handful it's at 80%. And those are really targeted to serve low-wage workforce and workers. One of the things that Latina Kerr recognized is that they were starting to have challenges with their direct service providers finding affordable housing in the community where they could live. And they realized that for an entity that takes care of a really vulnerable population, their workforce is really mission critical, and having stability in their workforce, including their housing, was really important to their ability to function as an organization. This project is also targeting net zero energy. So you can see the very large solar array on the roof, excuse me, as well as it may be a little harder to see, but it kind of in the center on the top photo, there's a large photovoltaic array. It's over the surface parking and some basic parking canopies that we put, which will provide shade, as well as additional surface area to generate power. Next slide, please. We're gonna sort of keep on this trend of talking to you about our experience in the projects we've completed as a way to demonstrate both our expertise, but also our approach and how some of those lessons learned in that experience are applicable to your project. Next slide.
So clearly Jill knows how to put together complicated financing. I'll talk a little bit about this project. You may be familiar with Crescent Village. It has some similarities in that it was a greenfield redevelopment with no infrastructure in place. I executed this project while I worked at Arley & Company as development director, and came on very early in the planning process and was able to stay on board on this project all the way through the completion of the primary buildings in the town center. A lot of the success of this project came about by the outreach of the neighborhood and really seeing what was needed in that neighborhood, both from a market research standpoint and from direct contact with the residents who lived there. There was a lot of housing in the area. There was a large commercial center, but there really wasn't sort of a town center. There was a lack of placemaking that had taken place in this neighborhood. And one of the main objectives of this was really to create that town center, a place where people could live and work, where there was retail, they could go out to eat. We focused the primary open space as the intersection of those streets. It actually can be closed off as a festival street. I don't know if any of you have experienced the movie nights we've done there, but we've closed off the streets, put the big screen up, and everybody sits in the middle of the street, wines and dines at the restaurants, and is able to watch a movie with their family in the summer. It required extensive jurisdictional approvals, from initially starting with a master plan, not unlike what we'll be doing on the Glenwood project. We had to subdivide and dedicate the streets, extensive public infrastructure. There was nothing here. We really had to extend all of the sewer, the water, the power, all that infrastructure into the site, and then took that to the vertical construction aspects of the project you see here. This project was able to achieve one of the first LEED Platinum projects in the region. We certified our offices as LEED Platinum, and there were several LEED Gold certified projects here as we developed this. Next slide. This project is an example of, I talked a little bit about the Intermountain Strategy that Edlin & Company and D. Chase Mixis took on. This is our second project in that strategy that's currently under construction in Spokane, Washington. This is 138 units of housing located really at the center of the University District up in Spokane and the downtown at the intersection of those two really important districts within Spokane. It was one of the first multifamily projects to invest in the downtown core in about 30 years there. We did partner with the city for LID funds to support many of the public improvements around the block. It has a 12-year tax abatement. In exchange for that, 20 of the units are rent restricted to provide workforce housing in that building. This project also was funded through an Opportunity Zone fund that we created to help support this project. And we're targeting LEED Gold certification on this with a hope to deliver this project early or late next year. Next slide.
This is the Brewery Blocks in Portland, which I've already talked about, the parking strategy. You know, this was really a five block area that was, you know, pretty empty at the time that we bought the existing brewery. We did preserve some of the historic buildings as well as the large smokestack. We created a mix of uses. Ground floor is activated with retail. It's got residential. It also has office, and that kind of having people there during the day in the office as well as at night in the residential really helps to support the viability of that retail. They're all LEED certified. And I'd say one thing, you know, there's also kind of a cultural anchor, if you will, with an armory that was transformed into a performing arts center. And I would say, you know, the streetscapes and our focus on creating what, you know, that public realm and that what we think of as the first 30 feet, the amount of a building you actually experience as a pedestrian when you're walking on the street, and really focusing on the design of that to make it interesting, to make it engaging, to make sure it was active, which I think we were able to accomplish very successfully, and combination of both traditional and non-traditional sources to make the project a reality. Next slide. This is a project we just completed on top of a new light rail station in Seattle in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. This is on a long-term ground lease from Sound Transit, who's the local transit agency. One of the 4 sites is 100% affordable at or below 60% of area median income. We partnered with a local nonprofit on that piece. And the other 3 sites incorporate 20% of the units below market. So we are able to achieve a really nice balanced mixed income community with over 40% of the units below market. We have a significant amount of ground floor retail. We included a community room as well that'll be available to the community for meetings. We have almost a third of the units family sized, and we also have a large public plaza that'll serve as a home for the Capitol Hills Farmers Market, as well as other community events and activities. Next, and then this is OMSI, the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, which is located on the central east side in Portland, right on the river. And we were selected by OMSI to serve as their master developer. And I've spent the last few years working very closely with them on that master plan, as well as the agreement with the city on the public-private partnership to fund that infrastructure. And it is about 11 acres that are planned for redevelopment. Couple key aspects of this include working on some upgrades to the existing riverfront that address both potentially a mitigation bank and restoration, as well as enhancing the existing trail system and creating kind of a linear, what we're calling a waterfront education park that'll include education about the natural history and the Native American history, as well as the more industrial past of the river. And we're gonna now finally turn to your site and talk a little bit about what we see as some of the constraints and opportunities, and how some of those things may be similar to issues that we've worked through on prior developments. Next slide. This is the South Waterfront Central District. also a riverfront site, former industrial land in Portland. We were partnered with another developer, Williams and Dame. We were not involved in the initial master planning, though we were involved in making some changes to that master plan once we were actually ready to begin with building development. And we did a number of the buildings, including a project in partnership with Oregon Health Sciences University, the Center for Health and Healing, as well as a number of residential towers. And this one had significant horizontal infrastructure needed, and that partnership with the city to fund that infrastructure was really key to making it a viable project. Next slide.
So this is a project some of you may be familiar with. This is the Eweb steam plant, and we won this project through a competitive RFP that was issued by the city of Eugene just before COVID hit. Since then, we've kind of re-envisioned. Initially, it was going to be a heavy in an office use, and because of COVID, we have moved away from that, and we're looking now at a 87-room hotel with a ground floor restaurant and rooftop bar and creative office space. This project really, the master plan for the riverfront has been going on for several years, and this project has had to really integrate into that. So there was extensive planning that went into place, really to lay out the infrastructure in a logical way that would really serve both this building and the remainder of the site. This project also had extensive public outreach as part of its requirement of the selection process. And we led a fairly extensive public outreach process that led to really prioritizing what the public was looking for in this project and how the city may be able to engage in helping support that. And what came of that was a public performance space that will be integrated into that ground floor lobby of this building. In addition, we're right along the river's edge. This is probably one of the closest buildings to the river. It'll be the closest you'll ever build to the river with the greenway requirements. And so a very sensitive approach had to be taken with how you deal with that river's edge. We worked very closely with the park and actually negotiated with them the ability for them to do the greenway entitlements and improvements along that edge. And we have a license agreement for the use of that space in conjunction with the building. So it was a fairly creative way for us to incorporate the river edge restoration work with this building with the remainder of the park that was completed. You'll see in the upper photo there, actually an overlook on top of the existing water intakes that are there in the river today. So not something that you could do as a new build in the river, but those are existing, and we propose to put an overview deck and some seating out over the river on that location. Next slide. So in taking a look at your site, you have here, as with any site, there's always constraints and opportunities, and there's plenty of both of those at this location. There are large greenfield and brownfield parcels here, which obviously present some challenges, but we have, I think, eventually what we'll see here is a relatively blank slate to allow us to implement the current refinement plan that you've been working on. There will be extensive infrastructure required to service this site. And so a lot of planning will need to go into what's the best and most logical way to extend that infrastructure. The highlighted site is the site that SEDA currently owns, but there are a lot of opportunities with the adjacent property owners to really master plan a much bigger vision here. Homes for Good, the property owner 2 Blue LLC to the top of the page, and then Roth and Roth with the Roaring Rapids Pizza. There's a real opportunity there for us to take on a much larger master planning vision for this project and incorporate those property owners into this development site. Certainly there's an amazing location here. This is really perhaps one of the best locations really anywhere along the river where there's an opportunity to develop. We'll have to be sensitive to that and to do it in the appropriate way. There are extensive setbacks. You'll see there's floodplain in the pink there. So a lot of thought's going to need to go into how we address that riparian river's edge. we're also directly adjacent to downtown Springfield. So there's been such a revitalization over the years with downtown Springfield. We look at that as a huge asset to this project, and this really can be an extension and a gateway into entering into the Springfield core. So with that, I think we'll turn it back to Courtney and open it up for questions.
Yeah, and we will have Nick Papanak join us as well. Just go make sure he's. So do feel free if folks have questions and want to raise a hand, place them in the chat. Nick, I will turn it over to you. Let you reintroduce yourself briefly.
Thank you, Courtney. Nick Papanak with Tiberius Solutions. I think all of you are familiar faces, and I believe I'm a familiar face to you as well, although I haven't been there in person for quite some time. I am hoping just to look for your hands and call on you as you have questions tonight. If there are particular questions that I think some of our other members of the consultant team might have some insights on, I might also call on them to chime in. And then there were some topics that were discussed with the technical advisory group, and some of those questions and answers might also prove instructive here. So if we don't tackle those issues through your own questions, I may ask some of those as well. And with that, I see we already have one hand raised for Board Member Stair. So go ahead and ask your question.
Well, thank you, Nick. Yeah, I've got a couple. There was a member of the public who spoke at the beginning of this meeting, Daphne Mattis, who I thought asked some pretty good questions. I wanted just to ask if you, your development would be in compliance with the Glenwood Refinement Plan, which does call for preservation of the riverfront.
Yeah, and I can probably jump on that, Jill. So we have not yet put forth a plan, but we do. The one thing I will say is we've studied the refinement plan, and we will use that as our primary guide for how we will implement any development there. So I think that's been it's an excellent document. It's definitely a guiding document that will really help us make decisions for how we treat that river's edge. What's the responsible way to deal with the river's edge? Okay. I saw that you were going to be coming back on December the 6th. Is that right?
So I'll jump in there. The team will not be back on December 6th. Staff will be back to have a deeper discussion with the board on December 6th. But if there is a desire for other engagement, we can
will there be a plan in place
some time for that?
Will there be a plan in place for us to discuss by December 6th?
A plan as far as a proposed development plan?
Correct.
No,
yeah.
There will not be by December 6th. So December 6th is a determination to formally select Edlin and Company and Chase Mixes to move forward with. It may take some time, and this may actually be a great question for the development team, which is just in your experience, what does that phasing and timing look like from where we are today to?
Well, with due respect, this is a very professional presentation tonight. I just would much prefer to have some sort of idea of what they were planning to build before we formally accepted them as the development team.
Yeah, and so I think, Courtney, on that, your question, I think if Mark or Jill could chime in here, because I do believe that the approach, this whole process was set up to only be that request for qualifications. And so I definitely, Board Member Stair, see where you're coming from, that I think everyone's interested in knowing what a real proposal would be here. But I believe if Jill or Mark, you want to talk about the length of time it takes to come up with a good, solid proposal that you know is consistent with the community and the property owners and is also market feasible, and sort of walk through what the SEDA board should expect in terms of that process to play out.
So I can take a stab at this and then Mark can jump in. I mean, it will be at least a year, and it could be more before there's a master plan, sort of the actual formal zoning in place for the site. And we need to, as part of that, of course, be able to show that the infrastructure exists or will exist and how it will get paid for that is needed in order to enable that development. You know, I've been working with OMSI for over 2 years. We're just at the point now where we are submitting our Central City Master Plan to the City of Portland. I'm not saying it will take 2 years. It's really dependent on kind of how the process goes, how quickly we're able to figure out with adjacent property owners kind of who's in and who's out. We're hoping that they will be in, which doesn't mean that we will necessarily be the developers of their property, but it means that they'll participate in the process. So there's a holistic master plan that can look at all of the property and agree sort of together where there's going to need to be, for example, right-of-way dedications to build new roads, where the open space should go, et cetera. And so there is quite a while before there's even a master plan, let alone kind of a first actual proposed building that would come out of the ground, because you first have to have that master plan improved and go through that process before you're able to go and propose a specific building.
Okay.
That said, we told, you know, the intention, of course, is not to create the wheel. There's been a lot of work done on the refinement plan that defines, I think, both the cities and communities' sort of intentions and hopes for the redevelopment, and that will absolutely be the starting place.
Well,
maybe quickly, the one thing, so go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
The one thing I'd add to that is, I mean, there's been a lot of interest in this site. So, you know, since we were sort of announced as the one person submitting on this project, I've had phone calls from a lot of people with a lot of very interesting ideas. So those are things we'll be vetting. You know, as soon as we are formally selected, we'll be reaching out to all the people who have proposed on this project and trying to understand the merits of those proposals and how they might fit into a master plan here. So a lot of things will be happening concurrently, but there is a formal process we'll have to go through that'll require extensive city approvals before we can really put forth any real concrete plan for vertical development.
So what you're saying is that it may be a year or two before we get a look at a final plan, but that we will be consulted as this goes along. Do you have any idea when you might have something for us?
Well, let me jump in real quick too as well, because I want to emphasize that this process is one that will be joint between the team and the board and also community. And so there will be many stages incrementally as it moves forward. You're seeing different ideas and having different discussions. There won't be an experience where you come back and it's just created and drawn. You'll have seen it happening over time. And I just want to make sure that's reinforced in this discussion. I'm sorry,
Sure, well,
Jill and Mark, I can let you jump in.
I think that's right. This will be something that we develop in conjunction with a lot of different stakeholders, and certainly SEDA board is a very important stakeholder in that, as is staff and the broader community. So it is something that will evolve over time and will come from a lot of those inputs as we partner with the stakeholders on the project.
So I'm getting that there will be other stakeholders consulted as well. When can the SEDA board expect, say, a first update on where the plans are? I guess I'm directing that as much to Courtney as I am to the team here.
So on the 6th, when we come back, we'll have a deeper discussion about next steps and really how we're moving into this phase of exclusive negotiation. And that's what really allows the development partner to start working on the many layers of team building, financing, engagement with the community, engagement with adjacent property owners. So the reality is it will line up more to the presentation we provided to the board about a month ago, where we really showed a 3 to 5 year process of ongoing engagement and conversation and setting priorities and running feasibility. And so it would be very preliminary for any images to come forward ahead of understanding if it can be vetted and if it's supported and desired by the board and the broader community. So that's why it's not that we're trying to hedge and not tell you, but it's a large site and there's a lot of work to be done. And it's important that it's done correctly. So we don't want to rush to an image that ultimately can't meet the market requirements or the board, the urban renewal agency's abilities.
I think a lot of the anxiety would be coming from the wide variety of possible uses for this land. I mean, there could be it could be a theme park, it could be a ballpark, it could be a hotel conference center with housing. It seems preliminary to me for us to be meeting on the 6th to give final approval to a team without any kind of an idea of what we were buying. But that's all I got for right now. Thanks.
All right, so I think unless anyone else wants to have some follow-up, conclusion statements on that, I think we've got a couple of questions here. Board Member Van Gordon, I saw your hand go up first, and then Board Member Burney after that.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to thank the team for both the effort to put this presentation together and their interest and desire to work with our community. It's always great when economic partners and development partners show up and frankly look to invest in our community. So I really do appreciate it. I think to Leonard's comments, right, and maybe Courtney, you can help with the deadline, like the timeline. So what I heard was the first step is to pick, we're choosing a partner, and then we go into the phase of actually developing an actual plan for people to review, so that there's multiple check-in points along the way before we say, yes, this is the plan, and it's going to take a little while to develop.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. So in that case, I'm perfectly comfortable with going forward to the 6th, because the only thing the 6th we would be talking about is, do we want to work with these great folks? And then we will design a plan. The one thing I do consistently hear is people's question about the riverfront. And I know, right, like we're talking about a 3 to 5 year process, and we've got lots of decision points, and we will continue to develop that process in place. So if I was the public, I think I guess the comment I would really ask people is just really be patient here, right? The refinement plan is the thing that really is protecting people's access to the riverfront and helping define what could actually go there. And then as we develop the actual project and get the actual details in a reasonable timeline, it really is going to be the thing that actually sort of informs and answers some of these questions. It's not, there's no real project yet because we haven't done that part yet. Is that correct, Courtney?
Yeah, and that's by design, really, so that we can make sure we do it together and jointly, and we don't get out of sync with the community or the market or the place.
Yes, and my sense here, and then I'll let Commissioner Burney jump in, is like, this is a hard, complicated site. We need to work the plan the way that it's laid out. We all want it done tomorrow, but that's not going to happen. But to be successful here, it means kind of getting on the road and just sort of working the actual plan to get to a solution. So I'm fine going forward. I'm excited, and I understand that it's going to be a couple of steps, and we'll get more details that come to light. And if you're a member of the public who's concerned about the riverfront, remember, we've got a lot of public input. We've got a lot of state land use law. We've got a lot of the Glenwood refinement plan. Those are all informing that whatever we end up with is really going to protect public access to the river and the river. Thank you.
All right, Board Member Burney.
First, since I've never met you, Mark, before, I just want to say that I've heard so many positive things about so many firms that you work with. So it's nice to meet you. It's equally nice to meet you, Jill. And I'm delighted with, I was going to ask for some of the clarification that Mayor Van Gordon, who said actual 4 times, I counted them in his statement, because we all, I think, long for something real and actual. As I understand it, and this is not being critical or cynical in the least, as I understand it, we went through it, this body, Mark and Jill, before we've had the opportunity to speak with you. It's very clear. You can do whatever needs to be done. I really enjoyed the presentation. But what's equally clear is we had a couple of groups that actually had financing and had ideas, and maybe we're running a little too fast. Correct me if I'm wrong. There is absolutely zero plan here. There's really a statement of qualification. There's zero financing in place at this point, because how can you secure financing if you don't know what you're going to build? Whether that's opportunity zone, mezzanine, whatever the damn capital stack looks like. There's no contractors selected at this point. So really, are we just, Courtney, maybe this is a Courtney question, are we simply with no competition, but with only one group that responded within the time frame that was set, which was set to hurry up because I think all of us want to see some cranes and some things in the ground. Is this whole point just to say these guys, not these guys, but you know what I mean, this firm is qualified? And what do they get? Do they get the property and the ownership? What do they get if they're selected to be the developers of this? Or are they paying for the property like the other two groups were offering to do? What exactly is the business relationship here?
So by the board's direction, you have issued a request for qualified developers, which means you asked to see the qualifications and experience of developers. So it was a competitive process, and one did choose to submit, although others did also provide feedback on their process. We have been unable to verify some of the other claims of funding being made available. So at this point, we're moving forward with this first RFQ process. We've also not done an RFP process on this particular property before, so this really is our first competitive. And it's set up in order to enter into an exclusive agreement with the one qualifying developer that allows us to start that negotiating. And we wouldn't want to negotiate ahead of knowing what the actual problem is we're working to solve for, or opportunity is that we're working to claim. So that's really the next step, is to formalize our relationship so that we can enter that kind of open, trusting process that's not confusing for the community or for staff, and start to explore the path forward jointly.
Thank you. And am I correct in that one thing that staff had said this board ought to do, which we've never really done, is say what would our priorities be for the site, i.e. housing and percent numbers, percent subsidized, percent workforce, how would that financing look? i.e., and Jill, I think he's really spoke to this in one of the other projects, we may have some electric infrastructure problems here. Are we looking at a net zero project? And I'm curious, if it's net zero, you can't do that just with solar. You probably need storage and maybe even microgrid technologies, which exist. And I'm sure you're very familiar with them. So at what point does this board say, here's a vision we want, or here's components of a vision we want, here's a time frame we would love if it's possible, so that in fact, we are full partners as opposed to just saying, what's your idea for the site?
In addition to the refinement plan work that the board already did, or the facilitated priority work from this summer, another revisit? Or are you talking more at a detailed perspective of massing?
I don't know how to answer your question. I just want to see how, I know what I want to see. I don't know what everyone wants to see, and the facilitated discussions didn't allow for the give and take that I would really look forward to having with Mark and Jill if they're selected, right? So we can really dig in and do this together.
Yeah, and Board Member Bernie, I think that you've enumerated a number of points about the complexity of coming up with a specific plan here. And I think you did mention the word partnership, that would be the decision on December 6th, that you are going to become partners with this development team to work your way through. I think maybe Abe, I'd like to see if Abe Farkas, one of the other members of the consultant team, could provide some comments on his depth of experience with other jurisdictions that have been at a similar point working on these projects, and how the legal agreements, the contracts between the city, the public sector, and the private development team, how those evolve over time. And you get from where you are today, just selecting a qualified developer, to ultimately coming to a clear agreement on what the development team, how they're being compensated, what the final product is going to look like, the evolution to get from here to there. Oh, and Abe, I think you're on mute right now. Abe, you're still on mute there.
Got it. Okay, I'm unmuted. I've got my blue man outfit today. I can't control the light in here. Yeah, thank you, Nick. So you've chosen, as Courtney's already mentioned, an RFQ process. You want to pick a developer based on their experience in similar situations that has achieved the kinds of goals you've identified previously: affordable housing, mixed income housing, treatment of a riverfront, using a range of alternative financing mechanisms. And that's indeed what this process has been about. Now a developer has been preliminarily identified, actually a team of developers that have been through exactly the kinds of environments that you have identified. So even though there's one developer, it's one developer that basically hits every button. So let me just state that. And I think you should be very fortunate in having that party to work with. So the process does indeed involve your giving, your blessing to have that developer work with yourselves, with a larger community, with staff, through initially an exclusive negotiating agreement, which gives them some time to do their due diligence, identify other possible partners, whether it be a housing authority, private landowners, other vertical developers who may be interested. I put their team together and enter into basically ultimately a memorandum of understanding that will clarify how they will be working with the city, where the infrastructure funds preliminarily come from, on both sides, the public side and private side, whether the property will be leased or whether it'll be sold, and just an entire range of variables, to say nothing of making sure that you're interacting with key community interest groups. All of that takes quite a bit of time, and you want to go through that carefully before you put an image out about what can be built. You want to make sure you're testing the market for what can be built, given the traditional financing sources and the creative financing sources. And at that point, that's when I think it makes sense to begin revealing images, because then the community has something realistic. And if everybody's happy, you end up negotiating a development agreement that binds all the parties involved legally to follow through on what they said they were going to do in the MOU. And Jill and Mark, feel free to step in if that hasn't been similar to other processes you've been involved in.
No, that's exactly, it starts out typically with some kind of exclusive negotiation agreement or MOU, because we need to have something that allows us, for example, to go talk to a neighboring property owner and say, hey, we're the, selected developer. It's a series of steps, if you will, right? From, what happens earlier when there's more unknowns to as you move further down the line with the process and there's fewer unknowns, and then you get to a development and disposition agreement, which starts to talk about the property specifically, what will happen there, what won't happen there, what the developer's going to do, what the city's going to do, how are we paying for the roads, how are we paying for the park, how, there's a lot of things that we need to work through. And first we have to be confident that we all have a plan that everybody is supportive of, that accomplishes the goals everybody wants to support and is financially feasible, right? Before we go, and there may be multiple plans that we look at that'll have pros and cons, that we might together choose to, go one way instead of another way. And that will be part of the process that I, would expect that we would be doing in partnership with you. I think the idea in doing a request for qualifications was to find a partner to then go through that process together. In this early kind of time period, we don't have the right, at that point, a binding right to be able to buy the property. We're not getting paid, we're spending our time, because where we want to get is to the next step, with you, where we have a plan and can move to a more binding agreement.
Well, I want to interrupt here because thank you, Abe and Nick and Jill, for the remediation. I'm not used to doing it this way, so that helps clarify for me the process. Thank you.
It was a good question. So I think now we've got the next hand up was board member Pictionary.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, good questions, Joe. I appreciate those. Now, I wanted to make a comment that's been made before. I really appreciate the presentation you put together. It was very well done. It was very easy to follow, and it really showcased what you were capable of, which then excites me about wanting to see what you're capable of doing here in Glenwood. So I'm excited we've put a lot of time, and I know Steve Mose is going to say a lot of time. And let me tell you about time. Okay, I get it. We've put a ton of time into this, way more time than I've liked to have done even to get to this point, but we've been crossing our T's and dotting our I's in the right way. We weren't ready until, and as far as I'm concerned, until we got the RFP and it was done correctly. It was answered correctly. We have vetted you correctly, and I am comfortable moving forward, absolutely comfortable. I am excited to see what is next, and I look forward to see what kind of products you continue to put out for us. And I really am looking forward to seeing the options that will be laid before us to answer those questions Joe put out, because I sounded like I was kidding you, but those are good questions, Joe. Maybe a little ribbing, but mostly good questions. And but seriously, this is like some of these projects that I've been on council since '04, and there's a few projects that have come along. We did a $500 million project that talked about the riverbanks, that meaning the Sacred Heart. Is that Peace Health? That was what I keyed in on too, as far as the river, the access for the public, the use for the public, even though it's a hospital, but that's a ton of beautiful property there that is used by the public all the time. So that's going to be right at the top of my list as well. I don't want to shut the public out. And I'm really looking forward to what you can do for us and for the community and for Glenwood and the people there that live nearby and in a broader regional perspective. So I'm happy to say I am looking forward to the next step, and I am fully behind you. How's that?
All right. No response needed, I think, there. I think the next hand up was Chair Woodrow.
Yes. A couple things. I think we started this process of an RFQ to prevent ourselves from putting the cart before the horse. We wanted to do due process through being able to identify the qualifications of any developer, to be able to then take these next steps in the correct progression to get to a point that as much as possible is responsive to not only us as a board, neighboring properties, the community at large. We got some negative feedback with some of the things that came out earlier this year in regards to people's ideas of what could go on that property. And so I appreciate Edlin and Demixis. I'm sorry, I get tongue-tied on that one. I appreciate the thoroughness and the expected thoroughness of having community interaction and community outreach, because that is such a prime piece of property, and it is so doable to be able to, I would say, satisfy 90% of the people out there if the outreach is there and correct, and gets to communicate with the people and get their ideas and their input and their questions. So I appreciate I appreciate going through this process and getting it, having the RFQ out there and having a response. The other thing I will add in is I was part of the technical review committee this last week, and to a person on that committee, they identified top scores, top opinions about this particular RFQ response. So talked about how lucky we are to have them. And I think they gave us the same presentation that they gave you tonight. And I personally feel the same way. We've been given a very thorough, pragmatic way of looking at this and getting to the point of where I'm looking at the possibility of seeing ahead of having, half a dozen different ideas as to what could happen on that property. And one of them will float to the top and we'll be there. But I'm looking forward to that.
All right, I don't see any other hands up right now, but piggybacking off of one of Chair Woodrow's points, I know that one topic of conversation at the technical advisory group that I think is also just of great interest to the general public is that topic of public involvement, both with the general public and with the adjacent property owners. And Mark, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind providing some additional thoughts on your team's overall approach to that public involvement and the neighboring property owners, and then maybe what some of the early steps would be on that front.
Yeah, I think, I know there was quite a bit of public engagement that happened with the refinement plan. And so having some context around what was learned from that process would really help inform us on what is appropriate for the next steps. I think we would largely look to the SEDA board to help us shape what that public process looks like. I think you're probably in the best position to represent your constituents and help us understand what their needs and desires are. We're fully on board with engaging in public process. I think it's something that both Jill and I have done extensively, and we feel there can be great value with that. And if not done correctly, there can be great risk. You get down the road and realize there's a misalignment of expectations. What that process looks like is something that we probably need to work on together. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do engagement. So I'm not exactly answering your question other than saying, I think we're fully prepared to do what's the appropriate process for this community. And we would look largely to this board to help us shape that process.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. One other question that was raised at the advisory group meeting that I also think is helpful to hear the answer. We asked, this is a proposal from two companies, Edlin and Company and DeChase Mixis, and we've got Mark and Jill here at the presentation, but is it always going to be Mark and Jill that is meeting with SEDA? And so I'd love it if you could let us know, the people we'll be working with, and then, explain your personal commitments to this project.
Sure, I could take a stab at that. So Mark and I would be basically your point of contact from beginning to end. So we're not going to go away. You don't get rid of us. You're stuck with us. We each both have additional partners that would be engaged in the process, and we'd be taking advantage of their specific expertise and their specific roles. For example, my partner, Roger Craig, is our lead on raising equity and debt. He would do that for this project. Mark Edlin is incredible at kind of big picture visioning for these types of developments. He would be involved in that. And then we also both have staff that will support us and help us get, all of the myriad of tasks and kind of project management and management of all of the details as we move forward. Some of whom some of you might get to know throughout the process, and some that you might not, but we will remain as your single kind of points of contact from beginning to end.
All right, thank you for that. I think we're about 15 minutes away from the scheduled end time of this item. So maybe if folks have any other questions, any hands that want to go up, or any other comments they'd like to make. Otherwise, I know, Courtney, maybe you wanted to close this conversation with a reminder of what the topics of discussion would be at the December 6th meeting.
Yeah, I think first, Dina, I saw your hand pop up. Might bring you up.
Thanks, Courtney. I just wanted to share my own thoughts with the board about the process that a couple of people have asked about, and the developers that are in front of this board. So one, I think this is a really typical process, and having done a lot of work in this space, I really appreciate that DeChase and Edlin and Co. have put forward this response to the RFQ, that they recognize the time it takes to do a development of this nature and scale and to do it successfully. I know that both of these parties understand that process thoroughly, that they understand that there's a lot of feasibility work that needs to be done, that is about things about what this market can bear, in addition to what the community and what this board wants and what's consistent with the refinement plan. I know that they understand all of the physical diligence that needs to be done, the importance of master planning in terms of creating something that will be cohesive. And I just want, to let this board know that I think that you all should be very excited that this team has responded to this RFQ. They're proven. I personally have worked with, not as a client as much as I may have liked, but with Edlin and Girding Edlin for almost 2 decades, and their other consultants and their real estate and land use lawyers. They're incredibly capable. And I am just thrilled for the city and for this board that these parties have responded.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Dina.
I see board member Bernie has a hand up as well.
I just wanted to say that as much as I may have been a thorn in the side of some of this process, I also want to personally say I'm delighted that developers of your stature and your abilities have stepped up, truly. The mayor and I both personally met with and invited the other 2 groups that had previously submitted proposals to submit for this process. For whatever reasons they did not, you all did. And normally if I only get one applicant, having been a developer of a smaller scale than you, if I only have one group applying, I question the process, or I'll question whether this is the sampling we need. But in this case, I just want to echo what Dina said. I think that it's very impressive. I think as long as we're part of the process and we're integrally involved and we help define what we'd like, and you shout back and say, but this is what the market will bear, right? And we just negotiate and figure this stuff out together very granularly. For what it's worth, I'm really pleased we're moving forward on something. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Can't wait to see what that something is.
So we can start with some of the conversations about the something on December 6th. We will come back as staff to the board with quite a bit more material. We'll also incorporate the outcomes of the technical review committee work and who that committee was. They were very invested in time to review, but also to engage, and that it was meaningful engagement. So we're appreciative of the time and opportunity to pull that team in as well. We will have a couple steps and options for moving forward during that December 6th meeting. It's not currently slated as an additional conversation with Edlin and Company and DeChase Mixis, but what we know is there will be a lot of additional conversations in the future. That's just part of the partnership moving forward. So you'll get to know each other quite well in addition to the community engagement. But if there are any other questions, aside from that, we really just thank Mark and Jill and the team behind you that helped with this presentation We thank you for all your time and your care. You have been incredibly engaged and open and accepting of all the questions, which has been very appreciated by us. And I think there's also a lot of gratitude to this board because you did a lot of work over the summer to put together that RFQ and to have those discussions about your priorities. And it created a really successful outcome here. And so we are appreciative of the time that you've given us to do that work. Chair Woodrow, I don't know if you have any other thoughts or questions for us, but I think we've basically concluded the evening for this item. Oh, you're muted.
I believe we have. I believe we've concluded. We're headed into what we'll do on the 6th of December. And I think this conversation and the presentation tonight put us in a common frame of mind. So we now know what's ahead of us and where we're going. Maybe we certainly don't know all the details, but we know the timeline, and we're just all set, oriented to the right direction now.
Perfect. So, and thank you to the development. I want to, Dina and Lorelei and Abe and definitely Nick. Thanks for jumping in today and helping. Appreciated it. I think that's the end of our item. Looking at Nancy or Neil to see if we have anything else, but
no. Then, so I will adjourn the meeting then if there's nothing further to come out.
Hey, thanks. This was good. Thank you very, very much.
Meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, Chair. Happy Thanksgiving.
Say happy Thanksgiving to you guys.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks. Bye.